Well, thank you everyone for being here this evening. I do appreciate you being here, giving me a chance to talk to you. And we're going to be looking at Genesis again. No surprise there. We're going to be looking at Genesis 19. We're not going to be able to get through the whole chapter. We're going to get down to about verse 26. So that's kind of, I don't know. I've been squeezing in like all the chapters, but it's not always possible. So, but I do want us to focus on something as we go through this part of the chapter. I want us to focus on the idea of influence. We're going to see how sometimes we have no influence on others. We can't always prevent people from making bad choices. Even angels can't always convince someone to do the right thing. Sometimes the world can influence us to do the wrong thing. And God's love for us influences what he does. And our cries or pleadings to him can also influence God. So let's begin. If we look at Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, "Hear now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." Now, these are the same two angels we last saw with Abraham and the Lord. So just so everybody's aware. Notice that Lot is in the gate of the city, implying that he's a person of at least some importance in the city, and he should have some influence, right? Verse 2, notice that they would rather spend the night outside than inside. Now, a couple of possibilities here. It could be that maybe the homes didn't look too hospitable or whatever, but more likely they were waiting to see how the inhabitants of the city were going to react to them. So, now if we look at verse 3, but he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So Lot was very insistent, and he did manage to influence them to come into his house. We're going to see why. I think it's pretty obvious. Most of y'all know, but probably all of you know. But yeah, he influenced them to come into his house and let him make them this feast, this baked bread and all of that. So then verses 4 and 5. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally." Now, if we look at verse 4, notice that all the people of the town are involved. And it's kind of, you have to kind of look at the words here where it says men, the men of the city. That word is actually like the mankind, the mortals of the city, the people of the city, other than just men. And the same with the men of Sodom. It's the same word, and it really doesn't mean just men. It means the humans, the people of the city. And then it says all the people from every quarter. Now there they use a different word, but basically saying all the people of the city, everyone. Oh wait, nope, that's wrong. I'm sorry. It actually is referring to the crowd that's there. It's saying the crowd. It's trying to refer to the crowd as a unit. I'm not sure why they call it quite the way they do. But nonetheless, just when you go back and look at the Hebrew, you'll see that those words are just a little off. They're just a little different. And that's the crowd from every quarter, the crowd of people. So everyone's involved, not just some young, rambunctious people, not some older criminal types or anything like that. Everyone's involved. Let's see. Yeah, the word for the people was the crowd. And so in verse 5, when we look here, there's no doubt what they meant here, right? They mean to sexually assault and rape these men. That's what they mean. That's how depraved they are. It's, to our minds, that sounds ludicrous. Then a whole town would turn out like this, right? That they would be like this. it's hard to think of. But we did see this type of thing before the flood, where all the people were evil and that's all they thought of was wickedness, except for Noah and his family. So we have seen an example of that before. And we do have to remember, maybe all these people weren't always that evil. But if we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and look at verses 33 and 34, the Corinthians were, some bad influences were coming to them and telling them to not believe in the resurrection. And Paul corrected them. And then he says this, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. Awake to righteousness and do not sin, for some do not have the knowledge of God. I speak this to your shame. Again, we should have the knowledge of God. We should be aware so that we're not deceived by any false teaching like this that would deny the resurrection. So, now, I've often thought about this in regard to Lot's family and Lot being there in Sodom. That has to have some bad influence on them in some way, just being in such an evil place where everyone would turn out to commit such an atrocity, such a thing. I mean, we live in a world of sinfulness, but I don't think anything on par with that. I don't see that happening in Worcester. So let's see how Lot responds here. So verses 6 through 8. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Pardon me. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. So notice that Lot is trying to protect these men, and he's willing to go to extremes. And you can't say anything else, but that's extreme. He offers his virgin daughters to appease the crowd. And then notice at the end of verse 8, this is why Lot was so insistent and influencing those men, the angels, to come and stay in his house. It was to protect them under the shadow of my roof. He knew he needed to protect them, so he brought them in. And in a lot of ancient cultures, you were required to protect and honor and treat your guests very well. Even if it turned out that your guest was accidentally maybe an enemy or something like that, you were to do no harm. It was prohibited in those cultures that you would do any harm to your guest or allow them any bad thing, right? It was a moral duty. And some examples of places that practiced this, maybe not all perfectly, but there was Greece, Rome, Japan, the Norse territories, India, and New Zealand, just to name a few, that had strong cultural expectations of safeguarding a guest in your house. And you were supposed to honor them and treat them well. And you just didn't invite people into your house lightly because it was a responsibility, a moral duty. So here, Lot hoped that this would afford him some influence with the people and that they would understand this and he would be able to protect these men because these men were in his house, right? They were guests in his house. So Lot hoped that this type of tradition would work with these folks. I would say we still keep a decent amount of that kind of hospitality as Christians, maybe not to the extreme, definitely not to the extreme of offering our children, but still we do try to always treat our guests well and be kind to them and honor them. And we just call it hospitality. So Lot's situation, his situation is extreme, especially by our standards. That would be very extreme. So verses 9 through 11. And they said, stand back. Then they said, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men, and this is referring to the angels inside, reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. So verse 9, the crowd is telling Lot to get out of the way when it says stand back. They're telling him to basically get out of the way. They are determined. But notice again, or notice further, how they talk about Lot. He's like the newer guy in town. And notice he is acting as a judge. Remember, he was sitting in the gate, right? So they resent his authority, assuming he has any, right? So they resent that, and it could be that Lot truly was trying to bring the people out of some of their evilness, right? That he was trying to be a good influence on the people. That's what it sounds like. But you'll notice here that Lot really has no influence with this crowd, with these people. And so it's similar to what we see in the world today sometimes when, what do they so often say about us if we try to correct some aberrant behavior, or if we talk about the wrongness of abortion or anything like that? Well, they call us judges. They say we're judging them. They say that like that's a bad thing. But sometimes judgment is the right thing. When we're judging certain actions and we know they're wrong, that's fine. But they talk about that. They resent us for it. They point that out as if it's evil. And even though we're really just encouraging them to change and to not do evil things like that. But they point to us and claim that we're evil. And sometimes we see in the world that people get violent over it. I've seen a number of different videos where people are just talking to other people. And some of them will actually listen and have a conversation, but some will just come up and just be violent. So that does happen too. So just like we're seeing here with Lot. Now these people, they press on Lot and the door. They don't care if they hurt or kill him. And if he had any influence in this town, I would say it's probably gone here. So, and that might remind you of this. Matthew chapter 7, verse 6. Now this is in the Sermon on the Mount, kind of toward the end in chapter 7. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. This is probably, what Lot's going through is probably a little more literal than I usually take that, but they are getting violent with him. And sometimes, we might run into these situations when we're talking to people about the Lord, or to correct people with God's word, or to try to persuade people to follow the Lord correctly. And to try and help them. We would mean that in a good way, to try and help them. But some people don't want to hear that. They just want whatever they want. Like this crowd, they just want whatever they want. So we need to recognize if we do accidentally kind of get into a situation like that, realize that before the mob attacks and exit that situation. But so with Lot, it's going to be a little different. He's got angels to help him. So, all right, so Lot's time to help them at this point is pretty much up. He's not going to be able to help them anymore. So if we look at the next verses, well, no, we just looked at those verses. Oh, we'll just go back to our verses. That's what I mean. Anyway, so in verse 10, that is the next verse. Sorry, I'm confusing myself. If verse 10 sounds kind of like a little miracle, it might have been. Because remember, they're pressing a lot in the door, and the door's about to give in. But these guys, and maybe it's just with strength, or maybe it's with, their angels. So that may be some divine strength. They just push the door and pull Lot back in. Or sometimes I think it sounds like almost like they would have pulled him through the door. But it's not really what it says. It says they pulled him and then shut the door. So, and then verse 11. This is really a little bit of miraculous power. It didn't really hurt anyone, but they blinded all the people there. The people were so disoriented, they wore themselves out trying to find the door. So if we look at the next couple of verses, then the men said to Lot, have you any, now these are the angels again, not the crowd outside. Have you anyone else here son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, take them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So here we see the angels, which, we know they're sent by God. They are determined to help Lot and save his family. And this goes back to proving Abraham's question about God, will not the judge of the earth do what is right? Now I'm wildly paraphrasing it horribly, but God will not destroy the righteous with the wicked. That's the real thing. He will not. So he's going to save Lot and his family, the only righteous there. And there's also the idea, of course, that Abraham, he's doing this partly out of remembering Abraham, of course, as well. But Lot is trying to do good things, it seems like. So verse 12, the angels tell Lot to get any of his people and get them out. Verse 13, they explain exactly why they're there. They're not there to mess around. They're there to destroy Sodom and the other sinful cities. But right now we're focused on this. Sodom really just proved, even with them not being out in the open in the square, just proved what a violent, sinful place it is, the people, the way the people prey on the innocent there. And the Lord, he's right and he's just. He can judge them and he can destroy them. That is his right. The world doesn't always want to hear about that either, but that's the truth of things. So we have to remember that the time of this world is finite, like our lives. They're short, but we will all be judged by God's standards, not by our standards, not by man's standards at all. If we look at verse 14, so Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city." But to his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. So this too was a reflection of what we see in the world. A lot of times people kind of mock and laugh and don't take the Lord seriously, don't take anything like that serious. But that mockery, unfortunately, will die in hell. And we don't want that for them. And like Lot, we need to at least give them a chance. I mean, he's gone and talked to them. They may not accept it, but when we talk to people, maybe some will accept that and will change and come to the Lord. These guys are not looking at that salvation seriously at all. They're just going to stay there. And to Lot's credit, he tried. But again, looking back at our theme of this chapter, he seems to have no influence with his sons-in-law. If we look at the next verses, when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. Now, to me, this sounds like teleportation or something of that. It may just mean they drug him, but it sounds like it's something that happens quickly. Nonetheless, so the angels are urging him to hurry, right? But in verse 16, he's lingering. Why is he lingering? The Hebrew word says he's hesitant. He's delaying. And this is a purposeful act. So why is he lingering? Is he worried about personal belongings or something of that nature? His home, his wealth in some way? Is that influencing Lot to stand around and wait? I mean, we're talking about saving his family. And then the angels just have to take the matters into their hands and just take him outside the city. Like I said, it sounds to me almost like they teleported him, but either way, they took him out. And notice that the Lord is still being merciful to Lot, even though he's delaying, he's hesitant. The Lord is still being merciful, but the angels had to physically remove them. And for us, when we know to get out of the situation, to be out of the situation, when we know what the Lord wants for us, we need to obey. We need to not linger and we need to do what he's telling us to do, because he always wants the best for us. And the promises of God are actually greater than anything we would ever have in this life. And so we can equate this to salvation. We shouldn't be, if we need salvation, we shouldn't be lingering. We shouldn't be delaying. We shouldn't be thinking about those other things. The time is always now, and it's always today. So if we look at verse 17, so it came to pass when they had brought them outside that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. So again, the angels are really trying to impress upon Lot that this is an urgent thing. And they're trying to, again, influence him to get a move on, right? So they're doing everything but like kicking them or whatever, get a move on. You're going to die. Verses 18 and 19. Then Lot said to them, please know, my lords, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. So now Lot doesn't want to follow directions. Now, how often are we like that? We're like, God, please save me, get me out of this mess, but do it my way, right? I want out of here, but I want to do it my way. I don't want to do it your way. It's kind of like that bad joke where the guy's on the top of a building in a flood, and he's like, I'm waiting for God to save me, and boats come by, hey, get on the boat. Oh, I'm waiting for God to save me. Helicopter comes by. I'm waiting for God to save me. Then he drowns and goes to heaven. God, why didn't you save me? And God's like, well, I sent you boats. I sent you a helicopter. You just can't please some people, right? So it's like that bad old joke. I know it's kind of a bad joke, but it makes the point. Lot is now like not satisfied with the means of his rescue, and he wants to be rescued a different way. Okay. I don't know what that's about, but all right. So at the end of verse 19, it says, lest some evil overtake me. That's, again, that, I don't know what everybody else's translation says. I didn't get a chance to go through all that, but it's not exactly correct. It's not some undefined evil that Lot is afraid of. He's afraid he's going to get caught up in the destruction that's coming on the cities. He's afraid he's not going to make it in time. That's what he's getting at. So that's why he's going to make this counter proposal of what he would like to do. So let's take a look at that. In verse 20, see now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. So Lot's asking the angels, and thus really requesting of God, spare this little town so he can flee to it, because it's one of the towns that was set to be destroyed. So that's what he's asking for. Spare this little town so I can go there. Verses 21, 22. And he said to him, see, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow. When the word overthrow is showing up, that's destroy, lay waste to. I'm not sure how they come up with overthrow. Maybe that's just more of an older way of using that word, but they mean to destroy the city, for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. I think it's Zoar is how it's pronounced from when I was looking at it. And it is a little town, and that name means like small or little or insignificant. So it's a smaller town than the other towns. So again, though, God shows a lot of favor and mercy to Lot. Now, this town was one of those towns that was going to be destroyed, and now, due to Lot's influence, if you think about it, his influence, God is going to spare that town. It's not going to be destroyed now. Looking at verses 23 through 25, the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew or destroyed those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. So notice that God waits until Lot is safe. He waits till Lot is in that little city, that little town. And then God destroys the other cities, their inhabitants, including what grew on the ground. And you might remember from a previous lesson where we talked about this. Basically, when he destroyed these cities, he basically kind of salted the earth there too, and nothing would grow for hundreds of years. And then this area ended up being deserted for like 500 or 600 years, according to archaeologists. So, and this was God's judgment on them because people cried out about what was going on in those cities. God said he heard their cries. The angels in verse 13 said because the outcry against them had grown. So God was influenced by prayers, by pleadings, an outcry, a cry for help. That word outcry is the Hebrew word for that is basically means a cry for help. It's feminine, and it's also defined as a shriek, like of helplessness and distress. So he's heard all these cries, and he's influenced by those cries. And so we see judgment coming because of that. Again, our prayers and our pleadings, they mean something to God, and it has an influence. So God listens and he reacts as he judges correctly. It doesn't mean we can get him to do something wrong. Don't think that, but he judges correctly. See, am I in the right place? Yeah, okay. So Genesis 19, verse 26, our last verse here. But his wife looked back behind him, and is that right? Did I read that right? Yeah, okay. I feel like I'm missing something, but I'm not. It's kind of like this morning where I lost that slide. I'm afraid I'm doing that again, but I'm not. It's okay. So, but his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So, what had influence over Lot's wife? Why is, what was it their life there? Why is she looking back like that? Does she have friends there? Did she miss something already? Or was she, like Lot was lingering earlier? Was she thinking of something like that? I've heard a lot of sermons on this idea. Y'all probably have too. But the one thing that it really seems to point to, and I'm sure we've all heard before, is when we're called out of our sin, when we're called into a new life with the Lord, we don't want to be looking backward into our old life. We don't want to be longing for the old darkness and sin that we had in the past. When we're brought into salvation, into God's kingdom, we don't want to be wishing we were elsewhere, because that's a horrible idea. So we don't want to be looking back for that old life, for that old man and the things that he would, of course, love to do, right? In my case, anyway. And so we never want to return to that. We want to make sure that we're changing our future and filling our heart with good things of the Lord. And don't let things like this that Jesus talks about, we don't want to let things like this happen. When an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places seeking rest and finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept and put in order. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it also be with this wicked generation. So again, Jesus is describing an issue with people after they're saved, after they've had their heart cleansed. So, this is, in closing here, I just want us to think about this. What influences us? What influences us for good, for God, and what influences us for bad? Do we long for those sinful days? In these verses, when the Spirit came back, it found the man's heart empty. The man had been cleansed, everything had been set right. He should have been filling his heart with the things of God. He was no longer the sinful man he had been, so he had an opportunity. But when the Spirit came back, when the evil came back, we'll say, just found it empty. Nothing going on there. The man was not filling his heart with good things. And that's what we all should be doing. We should all be filling our heart with those good things that will influence us, those good things of God. They will influence us to make our lives better, to make us better. And without the Lord's influence, we just become like over time, we just become like the people in Sodom. We just become evil and corrupt as anyone else mentioned in the Bible or on the earth without the Lord's influence. We would be just as sinful as anyone else. So don't look back to the past and wish for those things. Always keep moving forward to the future and remember the promise of salvation that the Lord has given us. Sometimes I know things get hard, but He has promised to us a great eternity, and these lives are just temporary. So our future with Christ is eternal and greater than anything we can imagine. And this evening, if we could help anyone here to begin to follow Christ or to rededicate your life through baptism or anything of that nature, if we could help you be on track with God, then we just ask that you come forward and have a seat on the front as we stand and sing.